Hello, Em. Do you like mysteries?
Hey B. No, not really, but maybe. I don't know. What kind of mysteries?
Well, secret societies, concealed hallways, secret passages, mysterious cabals.
Well, anybody who's ever played a role playing game could say yes to that. So, yeah.
Well, today's episode has nothing to do with that, or only by a little. Today's friend and guest is a friend of mine, Vladana. Vladana, welcome to our podcast.
Hello, me and B. M and B. Oh, so I'm so sorry.
No, I like that. I'm changing my name to me.
No.
Me, just me. By the way, hi, Vladana, friend and guest and
Hello.
friend.
Hello, M.
That is a brilliant start, and I'm already liking this conversation.
You'll
Yeah.
get used to it. You'll get used to it.
Me, my name is me. Who are you? I'm me.
But I guess we will overcome this bad beginning.
Oh, I'm already over it.
Oh, yeah. So, Vladana, please tell us something about yourself. Where do you come from?
I come from the realms of art history, especially history of architecture. So that's my field of research. And the thing that I'm interested the most is the history of Belgrade during the 19th and the 20th century, and interesting stories that come with my research. So I was hoping to somehow share this with your audience and with you, and we can discuss some interesting topics about Belgrade as a city of missed opportunities and unrealized dreams, because that's exactly what Belgrade was, and still is.
Brilliant.
See that?
Brilliant. If I have to say something. First of all, we had promised in one of our episodes that we'll talk more about, the place where we're living at. By the way, we just got our first patron. I just saw the notification.
Really?
So yeah, kudos to us. Seems to be a co-host of ours, a future one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But anyways, here's the thing, right? We live in a wonderful country. We live in the biggest capital city of Serbia, Belgrade, and the city has so much to offer and so many stories to tell, but it's usually perceived by people as, the best nightlife, the craziest time you're going to have in Europe, stuff like that, which is very shallow. And finally, we are getting the chance to learn about something more. So we appreciate you being our guest, Vladana.
Thank you. And I must agree with you, because I think that's something, the Belgrade nightlife is something that's been very popular only recently, I guess. And Belgrade's history and some untold stories are something that might interest everyone, every person that comes as a tourist, and also people who live in the city and don't know much about their own town. So
I have to say that Belgrade being popular for its nightlife is sort of like going to Palace of Versailles because of its souvenir shop.
Yeah.
It's a good comparison.
I mean, it might be a very good souvenir shop, but all of the great things you're missing out if you go only for the souvenirs. It's something that simply occurred to me. And what she said, her area of expertise is 19th century, where all the coolest secret passages come from. It's a common knowledge.
Actually, my specialty is the 20th century, but 19th century is also very interesting, because that's the period when, during that time, the Turks were still in Belgrade, but they gradually were moving out of the city, and it became a Serbian capital. So that was the period when many turbulences were present, and the city changed its identity and its architecture. So that's really a fascinating period for Belgrade.
Yeah,
Awesome. From like an important city in every possible empire that controlled it to a modern European town with good nightlife being absolutely destroyed by people who govern it today. Let's hear about the good part, which
uh,
was obviously in history.
actually, destruction of Belgrade can be a separate episode on its own, you know? And
Yeah, but it's a recurring event. Everybody like wanted to destroy Belgrade, and a lot of them did.
yeah,
Let's remember the bombardment 20 years ago, the bombardment 40 years ago, and if you move it back, you'll see a lot of efforts to destroy the city. But today, the effort is coming from the ones who govern it.
oh yeah.
So definitely something to talk about and whine about, but maybe in a different time, because right now we might have something more interesting than that to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, I just have to add that destroying Belgrade, it's an ongoing project. So I guess it was something that, well, we can again return to the 19th century and the period when Belgrade had around 50 mosques, and now we have only one. So what happened with all the 49 mosques? Around like 50. So we are not sure about the exact number. But when Turks when they deserted the city, of course, being the new Serbian capital, nobody was very interested in like anything that had to do with Turkish heritage, the Ottoman heritage. So mosques were left to be empty, in decay, and eventually most of them were completely destroyed or just neglected and then used for some other purposes. But now, like, we have only one mosque, which is fascinating. So we can think about Belgrade like 200 years ago or even 300 years ago looked completely different than it looks now. Imagine how it will be like 100 years from now. I'm a little bit scared to think about that.
I just wanted to comment. We nearly lost even that one mosque, like some 13 years ago, like during the protests over Kosovo. I think it was set ablaze, but thanks to firemen and one particular archbishop who basically ran to save it, it was preserved and restored pretty quickly from what I can recall. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. And it's interesting that up until recently it was guarded by the police. So it was...
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a very turbulent area, and there's a lot of tension between different people who belong to different religions. And you guys know this very well. And also reflecting on the fact that, a lot of mosques were destroyed. The thing is, the Ottomans, right, they conquered a significant part of Europe and the rest of the world, right? In a sense, they were like the new Roman Empire, right?
Yeah.
And wherever they went, they built, they also did a very good thing. They collected a lot of information. They collected a lot of knowledge. And they saw a lot of seeds of their own culture in many other cultures. And in Serbia as well. You know how many words we use that are absolutely Turkish? So not everything that belongs to Turks was destroyed. But if you think about it, Turks were more or less the only ones who, let's say it like that, practiced Islam as their religion. So when they left, Islam went with them. And being people who have been constantly in a very turbulent state, constantly in wars, never being able to look at things long term, instead of turning those mosques into museums, at least, preserving their cultural heritage, not necessarily their religious heritage, was not something that Serbian people were even capable of simply figuring out on their own. because, and honestly, with Serbia, that's the state of things today. We as a people cannot think long term because you always are in a situation, right? Today, it's Kosovo and Metohija. A couple of years ago, we had all-out war on the Balkans, the destruction of Yugoslavia. Go back, there's the Second World War. Go back, there's the First World War. Go back, there's the Balkan Wars 1 and 2. Go back, and there's always some crap. I guess I was trying to answer the why, in terms of why that happened.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more because, I mean, that's completely true, because I can understand why all these mosques were eventually destroyed. So we couldn't expect people like Serbs from 100 years ago to think about cultural heritage. It was not really a concept worldwide till in that period. So especially, I mean, in Serbia. So this is something that was more developed during the 20th century. But what I wanted to say was that we have a city that's constantly changing, and it looked completely different. For example, we had divided parts of the city during the period of the Ottoman rule. So the Danube side was the Turkish side of the city, for example. So
where the fortress is, right?
Well, the fortress was, of course, under the Ottoman rule, but there was the military, and that was like the place of power. But where people lived, that was basically, you had two axes, 2 points of communication. The first one was where you now have a Students' Park or Student Square, as you probably know, Studenski Park. That was something like a farmer's market back in the day. So everyone came there to buy groceries, sell groceries, just to sell goods. And that was the point where everyone mixed. So both Christians and the Muslims and the Jews were all connecting on that location. And the other location
and it still
was...
is a market. It still is a market. Only now, the goods are drugs.
Well, a lot of cattle there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you look, for example, when you go back to the Roman period, on that location, you had the Roman baths, for example, which are now underground, but they were preserved at some point in the park when the archaeologists found them, and then people started throwing garbage into the archaeological site. So they decided, oh, it's not worth it. Let's just put.
Yeah, as I said, like it's like this gene of looking at long term into whatever, that gene is missing from the Balkan people.
Oh yeah,
like it's not just this us, the Serbs. Like seriously, like nobody is even capable of looking into the future just a bit further. Everybody's thinking about now. How do I, get rich fast, on somebody else's account, right? It is what it is. But, with Belgrade, I remember every time they dig somewhere, whether they're setting grounds for a new building or they are renovating a square, every time they dig somewhere, they find something of archaeological value. And the worst thing about it is they never do anything about it. Like we recently had somebody find an archaeological site on the Slavia Square, which was reconstructed recently, and they just built above it, and that's it. Because they want a new square. And that's it.
Can I interject something? I'm not really a person to go to malls. If I go to a mall, it is usually because I have to meet someone there. And recently in the Belgrade city center, a new mall was opened, Rajčeva. and I was there with a friend, and there were these large glass panes on the floor that show these ancient pillars and paved streets from the Roman times. And I was so shocked that someone was smart enough to actually do that, to make these windows so you can look at these priceless findings, that I asked my friend, like, are these real? Are these like casts? I mean, are these here just, for the sake of it, or are these genuine? And I was so glad that someone has tried at least something, in order to preserve it somehow. Though I would assume that much more of it was probably destroyed during the construction. I hope it's not, but...
Yeah, well, based on what we know, it probably was. The church is basically the only one that as an institution makes a lot of effort to preserve history, even though recently we had a situation where a church was flooded to build a road, I believe, or something.
Accumulation lake, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And that
right.
was not the first time. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess one of the first times was when they built the Gerdap hydro plant, or yeah. But I must say this: you said that the church is one of the rare institutions that preserve history and heritage. Recently, it's not the case, because we have a lot of examples where priests decide to throw away, for example, 18th century Baroque iconostases, because they think that's like Western, that's not Orthodox, whatever, and they just want to throw it into trash. Yes.
Wait, trash?
No, I'm not surprised. I am not surprised at all.
Oh man, like trash.
Yes.
Oh man, I've seen images and I was completely shocked at this. Like after the Vatican II, they introduced freestanding altars, and I don't want to go into all the liturgical changes in the Catholic Church, but there were so many images of shattered marble high altars, like in the dumpster. Literally, these rocks that are supposed to be the holiest place in the church, thrown in the trash. And just the thought that somebody would do that to an iconostasis is like, man. Yes, sorry, I had to rant.
Yes, I know. I mean, I'm so angry. I cannot. It's beyond comprehension what they are doing. And for example, we have also a recent case of trying to change the exterior of the church. Well, they succeeded in Kruševac. And it was an example of something like Neo-Byzantine style, but not exactly. Well, this is, I'm not going to go into details, but they wanted to make it more, I don't know, different, more like Žiča monastery. So they...
Yeah,
they changed,
this place is too Catholic. We need to give it a bit of Russian flavor.
No.
Paint everything gold.
The word you're looking for, Vladana, this is like an old joke. We'll make it better, more beautiful, and older.
Exactly.
Now, this is like this is Catholic, this is new, but we'll make a new older church.
I think that's their idea.
Vladana,
like more authentic, whatever.
Yeah, Vladana, I would like to ask you a question, because now that you have mentioned that your area of expertise is actually 20th century, which speaks loads about how much I know about my friends, but I know your last name, so that's a start. Now, for all of our listeners who don't know, Belgrade was bombarded on April 6th of 1941 by the Axis powers, and it practically obliterated the city. Among other things, our national library was leveled to the ground, caused priceless Serbian cultural heritage to be permanently lost. But I don't want to talk about the cultural heritage primarily. I wanted to ask you, Vladana, assuming that bombardment never happened, how do you think Belgrade would look today? What would be different? What would be like, for example, top 3 things that we would notice immediately that are very different from what we have today?
Well, first of all, we would have the old National Library.
Yeah, oh,
Uh,
that's a big one.
Yes, but I mean, it was not a huge building. It would we would probably need a new, larger one, which was built at the beginning of 1970s. But I think, first of all, we have to go back to the First World War when Belgrade lost a quarter of its buildings.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah, so and then during the Second World War, that number was, I'm not sure the exact amount, because only after the war there were major renovations of buildings that were not necessarily completely destroyed. So we sometimes cannot tell the difference that they were really bombed. But, I think we would probably see a better preserved, historically preserved old part of the city. So the historic part of the city would be more period like the first half of like the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. We wouldn't have that much post-war architecture in the city center, but still, like, post-war architects during the communist period also had deliberate interventions, because they, as modernists, believed that all that was like architecture of the past is not worth preserving. We should build new, better, etc. So I think there was an idea that we were lucky that we had like a vast area that is now New Belgrade, for them to experiment and build a new part of the city, because if we didn't have that, the old part would probably being torn down and completely changed.
Oh
yeah. So, but one building that would probably have stayed the same would be the post office next to the now former train station.
Oh yeah, the former beautiful building.
Yes. Well, there are now some ideas about restoring the original appearance of the building, but I'm not sure if it's a good idea, because it would be very expensive, and I doubt that they would do a good job. So it's like a thin line between kitsch and well, good reconstruction. Yes.
If I may say, so pretty sure it's gonna stay with, just being ideas. But in my opinion, it would be great if somebody would actually do some maintenance on these buildings. Everywhere you go, let me give you an example. Like literally our neighborhood, Vienna, the entire Austria, the entire Germany, everybody, they take care of their old buildings. And when you're walking, around those cities, you see the same building that was there 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and it has the same color, the same look. It really, creates this fantastic vibe. And you're in an old city, which has a rich history. A lot of things happen. You can just see that. And many a times when you're walking through Belgrade, you're walking next to dusty, unmaintained buildings in very poor state. And a lot of these buildings have a history on their own. They could speak volumes and volumes about who was there, what was happening there, and obviously we're going back to where I think the entire Balkans where we live in is today. I read a tweet about the Balkans saying something like, here we are sitting and discussing, the shape of lines in the sand, while Silicon Valley is talking about colonizing Mars.
Oh man.
Like it's such a good comment, because you can see how far back we are, just because we are unable to see anywhere beyond where we are right now. We're constantly living in this strange little,
Uh,
like, very special world.
I have to comment something, and I'll quote Vladana, because in Belgrade, restoration of old buildings is, at least it seems to me, done somewhat haphazardly. Like they won't restore a whole line of buildings; they'll only restore a certain one. So you have that one restored building
It will
standing.
shine.
It shines, and it's
in the middle of gray.
in the middle of gray, because all of the buildings are so covered in soot and whatnot that it's simply jarring. And in the street where I live, there is this one building which was sort of this dirty pinkish to dirty crimson, and they restored it, and now it is blazing white and the brightest crimson color you can imagine. And Vladana called this building a strawberry cake because it's like red, white, gray, like gray, red, white, red, white, gray.
And I have to add, I don't think it was even the original combination of colors.
You can't expect them to do a good job, Vladana. Come on.
Yeah, they will not pay for experts.
Somebody chose. Yeah, because they cost a lot, and you have very few good experts in facade restoration.
Exactly. I mean, that's it for. But let's not talk about the present, because obviously, as soon as we start going there,
there's no going
hating
back
on everything. Like we just end up hating on everything. But let's talk about. Well, I'm not saying the past was any better, but we actually have a very rich history as a people, as a nation, as a part of a bigger population, and Belgrade is such a representative place of all that history. Now, I'm wondering, we mentioned that bombardment where the entire library was leveled. I remember reading about the fact that like a lot of unique pieces of culture were destroyed at the time. So this is not the first and only example of something like this happening. A lot of people who were conquering other nations would do the same. And I don't know if you mentioned this, but Christian conquerors would always destroy everything. And
no, they wouldn't. No, they won't destroy everything. Come on. I mean, of course, there was some, proper standard amount of destruction, but it's not like they came in and leveled everything. Not even Muslims did that.
No, Muslims did the complete opposite. They would preserve everything, and
until ISIS came along.
Well,
yes.
Yeah. But there's a good question: are they a good representative of Islam? That's always, I think, a very hard question to answer.
But I think that the issue is that the concept of preserving cultural heritage is something very new. So when we read about destruction of the Library of Alexandria, we're like, oh no, that's tragedy. Why would somebody destroy it? But it makes perfect sense in context of previous peoples, So, not something I approve, just just sharing their worldview,
Of course. Well, we need to understand why people did what they did. I mean, in order to become better, we need to understand why they did what they did. So that's normal.
I hate the fact that unique pieces of art, culture, literature were destroyed. It's like I can feel the pain. Honestly, I can feel the pain. And what I wanted to say basically about Islam conquerors, they never destroyed anything of sorts. The first thing they did was get everything translated to Arabic or Turkish, and that is a huge difference. And it speaks volumes about the state of mind of Christian conquerors versus Islamic conquerors. There's a lot of arrogance in Christianity. You know that, right? especially
Correct.
Western Christianity. Ha ha ha.
Because we are so better.
Yeah. I'm just saying. The West. I mean, But
Oh,
what I'm trying to say, there's so much arrogance, and that costs a lot. It just it carries such a big price.
Yeah, but
And
whenever there is an ideological shift, you always have some sort of destruction of the traces of the previous ideology. And all three of us here are very well aware of the issue of changing of the street names in Belgrade. I mean, it's
to get rid of the communist
yeah,
heritage.
like first first communists removed a lot of old names which were like kings, monarchs, and so on. Then once the communism fell out of favor, then the trend is starting to reverse. So you have an ironic situation where, for example, some new street that never bore a name of some monarch or anything, but bore a name of some war hero, changes names, which is completely ridiculous in my opinion. But Vladana probably has some saucy information regarding that, because I think you and I have discussed this a couple of times by now.
Yeah, I just need to ask: is there anything more ridiculous than naming a street with a date, like the 27th of November?
oh yes. Well,
the 20,
that's
whatever.
again. Well, we have to return to the communist ideology and mapping the history and the ideology. Since when communists came to power in Yugoslavia, they needed to make a clear cut with everything that was previous regime, the monarchy, everything. But they had little materials. So you had a lot of war heroes, and then you had significant politicians that were communists, but then they ran out of ideas, so they needed the important dates for them to name, to map the city, because that's the one of the best ways to have really mapping the collective memory of a nation. So that was actually very clever, even though most of us don't know most of us, I know, and you probably know what happened on the 27th of March, or
right.
For example, the 14th of December or the 7th of July, we really don't know. But we know it was an important date.
I know these are street names, and thank God they changed that.
That's
November
true.
29th. I don't even remember. I can when somebody mentioned, like when you were talking with a person who's a bit older, and has been living in Belgrade for like decades, they would not only remember these names, but they would continue using them.
Yeah,
that's true.
The boulevard of freedom,
yeah,
and stuff like that. And I can only imagine poor communists creating like a circle and starting to think about how to rename streets. And they're like, okay, how many war heroes do we have? We have 32. Okay, how many important dates? 5. Okay, can we have more important dates, please? Did anybody have like a dog or a pet that made any difference in their lives, like
that flew to space?
Well, we have the Yuri Gagarin street, so
yeah, but look, the guy has international scientific value. Of
course,
his name is nowhere communist, And by the way, that's my street.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, just for the record, it is one of the longest streets in Belgrade, so odds are that you will live in Yuri Gagarin Street. So
yep.
When I hear that somebody lives in that street, I'm like, you told me nothing. That's like I live in half of Belgrade.
Exactly. That's why I disclosed it. Otherwise, I wouldn't.
Oh yeah, because your stalkers are no more wiser now.
Well, considering the power of the interwebs,
yeah,
nobody's safe.
Well, you heard it, folks. Don't go stalk him now that you know his approximate address. Vladana, we will have to say goodbye for now
Bye.
because it has been a long podcast and quite an enjoyable one. I hope that you will join us in the next episode where you will tell us some more of your favorite Belgrade trivia. For everybody else listening, remember to follow us on all the major platforms like Anchor, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and so on. We also have a Patreon profile. So, go share, subscribe, like, whatever it takes, to spread the word around. Bye.